Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. We are Tamala and Cindy, and together we are 2Psychics, No Limits. And with our channel, we are discussing our life experiences, talking about other relative topics that might from like a taboo or not safe to talk about. And we actually would like to share our views and our own perspective to let this all become like a normal topic. A lot of people might share our own difficult life experience and stuff, and we would like to share and show with this channel that it is all okay to talk about this. And today we are going to talk about contradictions. So Tamala and I, we have had completely different lives, and we found out that there are quite a lot of topics that we had nothing in common with, the completely opposite. So we thought like this is a very nice topic to share and see how that came across from our own perspectives. And Tamala, you mentioned, I think in one of our other videos, that you have been moving a lot.
That's true. I went back to my hometown a year or so ago, and I counted all of the places that I had lived growing up. And I only lived in that town about 16 years, and I lived in 18 different houses. And then after that, I moved to California, and I lived in 3 different houses. Then I moved to Germany. I lived in 2 different. Then in Florida, I lived in 3, 4 different. Georgia, 4, 5, 6. So I've lived probably in 40 different houses, and I'm 50 years old. So let's say 35 to 40 houses. And it's amazing because also I know at soul level, I'm a variable soul. And I think that's why it didn't bother me moving so much, is because I need that variety. And the variable experience of living in a different place and having different neighbors and having a different structure inside the home, like how it's set up, all of that stuff, where my room is in the house, all of that. So I understand you didn't move very much at all.
No, not at all. I grew up in a house when I was still living in the Netherlands, and we never moved out. So I stayed there for 24 years.
That's
24
awesome.
years in the same house. Then I moved to Switzerland, and this is my first and only apartment since 13 years.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and for me, you know what? For me, it is like this, that I actually prefer to have a house for a longer time of period, because I myself am traveling quite around. So I don't need to move the house. I prefer to have, a house at one spot, and then I'm the one who's traveling around. So how do you work?
Well, and I think I've always wanted to be a gypsy, and I've always wanted to be the one traveling, but I never had the opportunity. So now I think, because I've been living in the house that I live in now 8 years, and I've done more traveling. So it's not so heavy, because I am the one that gets to travel now. So yeah, that's an interesting perspective. But growing up, my mother also was a gypsy, obviously, because we moved every 6 months whether we needed to or not.
Wow. So how was it for you when you needed to move around? I mean, like, it is like packing, unpacking stuff, but it is also getting used to your new environment, to your new home, settling in, making like new friends, especially when you're at school at a young age. So how did that work for you?
Well, most of the time growing up, I stayed primarily in the same school, though at one period of time I did go to a different school for about half a year. But I had cousins that were in that school, so it made it easier because I could hang out with them, and they introduced me to people. But most of the time, because my city only had a couple of school districts because we were small, the schools that I went to growing up were, there wasn't too much upset around that. And in high school, I did change. I went to one high school freshman year, and then I moved and went to a different high school for the rest of high school. But that was okay because I knew people there. Because I lived in such a small town, everybody kind of knew everybody. And so I didn't really feel like I was missing anything or losing anything. Because also in middle school, I hung out at the skating rink. I don't know if you had those, the roller skating rinks. That was my jam.
No.
And so we all met on Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday at the skating rink anyway. So it didn't really matter that much.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would not know, even with the thought that I have to move to a new place, it is like already exhausting because I know I need to, pack things and stuff. And like, with the thought alone is for me like not appealing for me to move.
Really? It's exciting for me. I get to get rid of stuff I don't need anymore, and I get to be excited and inspired.
I can imagine. Yeah. There was another topic. Oh yeah, so relationship with your grandparents. I believe we had a completely different kind of relationship with grandparents.
Yeah. I lived a lot of my childhood with my grandparents and my great-grandparents on my father's side. So it's my father's dad and mom, and then my grandmother's dad and mom. And so they raised me a lot. They took care of me. They bought my clothes. When I went to private school, they paid for that. They were the ones that were the constant in my life. And so I was really connected to them.
I did not have a very close relationship with my grandparents from my dad's side, although we lived like a few blocks away from each other. I could walk to their home. It was only that they don't like foreigners. And because my mom is a foreigner, I did not feel accepted by them, because I was conscious enough that I'm like 50-50. 50% Dutch, 50% Asian. And when they do not have like the full appreciation and the respect to my mom, it felt that they would disrespect me at the same time because I'm part, I'm a part of my mom. So that's why I did not have this relationship with my grandparents as people would, describe that grandparents would be like, oh, they give you all the presents and, they give you all the candy. I got the candy, but not really a hug, or they were quite cold. And then the grandparents of my mom's side, I only saw them. So I think I only saw my grandmother maybe 3 times in my entire life, and my grandfather maybe 5 times, because they both still lived in Asia, and I did not speak the language. Although my grandpa actually taught me how to speak English. He taught me how to say certain words. He had certain animals in his back garden, and he would point out to them, and he would teach me a few words of English. But with them also not really that close, because I hardly saw them. I hardly saw them. And then because I'm a mix, I did not really fully understand what it is to have like, growing up in an Asian culture. For them, I was more European, so there was also this, there was just, too little time to actually understand where both parties were coming from. And because you are there for holidays, so you do nice stuff, but you do not really spend time together like a full day experience. You know what I mean? It is like visiting family and have conversations, have dinners, and that's it. It's a completely different thing than when you would actually be close to your family and see them maybe every single weekend or so.
Mm-hmm.
So I did not really have a close relationship to both of the grandparents on both sides.
And did you miss that when you were growing up? Did you noticed it as an absence?
Yeah, and the strange thing was that I actually felt much closer to my grandparents in Asia than to the grandparents I had in Europe.
Interesting.
Because to me, the grandparents I had in Asia, they were much warmer. And, you know, my grandpa, he taught me stuff and he showed me around. My grandma was like very much like a worker, and she had an attitude of like, I'm a woman, I can deal with my own stuff, don't help me. You know,
Mhm.
she was
Yeah.
one of those very strong, petite, you know. And then the grandparents on the European side, I found them super cold. So I saw the contradiction between, you know, both of the worlds. And I was like, you know, even though living in Europe, I'm more connected on an emotional level with my grandparents in Asia. Although I only saw them maybe 6 times in my entire lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah. So I missed the hugs, you know, I missed like, oh, Cindy, well done, you know, and it was always something like, well, you could have done better, right? You know?
Hmm.
It is also not fully respecting what who I am because of my background, because of my mom.
Right.
So that was for me like things that I could not really embrace.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
So I was like, why do grandparents do this? Because these are the, you know, these are not the stories that you hear the grandparents are. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, why would I do that? I'm your granddaughter.
Yeah.
So I missed the warmth, yes.
Mm. Now, even though they didn't respect your mom, did that cause problems with your parents, or did they stay married?
My parents stayed married until my mom passed away.
Hmm.
So my dad, in that perspective, he is quite, you know, he's quite strong, and he said to himself, I marry a person who I love and I want to be with for the rest of my life. This is you know, the woman I want to be with, and that's that. If you don't like it, you don't like it. And that is my dad's his perspective. You know, he said like, I'm the one having this life. So yes, it was, you know, I'm not saying that he agreed with what his family did or what his parents did. I'm not saying that. It is more like, you know, saying I'm going to be with the person that I want to be with, despite your opinions.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like very grounded. I did have some hard lessons with him, like difficult lessons, but he also taught me to like to see and to understand um like things as in like, don't listen always what other people are saying. Don't, you know, take that as if it is your own. Make first your own decision, your own opinion, and see if that connects with others. So that is one of the things that he always taught me. And it was like, I don't know. Mm, I understand now that I'm older what he was trying to do, but I also went into, you know, like as most of the children were going into, like listen to the adults because we are always right. You know what I mean?
I do, yes.
So that is a contradiction. That is something inside of you, like, well, shall I listen or shall I not listen? Because you're telling me this thing and somebody else tells me that. So what do you want me to do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
That's
that was
awesome.
my experience with my grandparents.
That's wonderful. So, how long were your parents married?
I have to calculate. when my mom passed away. So I believe they were married for 33 years.
Wow.
Yeah, for 33 years.
And how long has your mom been gone?
I believe she went in 2015. So this will be like the 4th year. Yeah, I have to say time goes very fast.
It does. Yeah.
Very fast.
It does. Yep, I agree. So your parents were married 33 years, and neither of my parents were able to have a long-term relationship.
Oh, really?
My mother was married 5 times.
Uh-huh.
And so she was divorced 4 times. In her last marriage, she was widowed. And then she passed away. And so she's been gone over 20 years. And my dad is still alive, and he's been married 5 times, but he's been divorced 5 times. So apparently my parents also enjoy variety. So, well, and I've been married and divorced 3 times. So we have, I guess my family has a different perspective of marriage than most. Marriage, the understanding that I grew up with around marriage was it's partnerships for as long as it's good. And it doesn't mean that you don't work through the problems. It just means that all of their partners were seasons, right? And I teach this thing in my class. People are in our experience for a season, a reason, or a lifetime. And so all of their marriages and all of mine have been for a season or a reason, but not a lifetime. So some people get their lifetimes and other people get their seasons or reasons, I guess.
Yeah. So how was it for you was it like confusing for you when you grew up? I don't know how long you were with your parents when they were together, because they were changing partners.
I'm going to tell you, they talk about, and I have a squeaky chair too. So if you hear noise, it's my chair. So, you know how people talk about in the South, right? That you could be your own grandpa, right? Have you heard that saying? It's big in the South because they say in the South, people intermarry. And this is true because my mom and dad were married, right? And they had me. And then they got divorced. Then my dad married a lady named Dolores. And her children, because of somewhere in the mix, they were my cousins. Okay, like somebody like in her aunt or something, I don't remember, but her kids were my cousins. And so when my dad married her, they became my stepbrother and sister and my cousins. Now my mother married Dolores's stepson. So Dolores had been married to somebody else and had a stepson, and my mother married him. And so the kids that were now my stepbrother and sister were also his half brother and sister. So I had a stepdad who was my stepdad, and also through my cousins and stepbrother and sister, he was also my uncle. And so, and Dolores was my aunt and my stepmother. So it was a tangled web of.
Wow.
They were the 2 were my cousins, my stepbrother and sister, and my aunt and uncle at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm happy you can laugh about it now.
It was funny then.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, good.
Yep, it was funny then. And then later, my dad married another lady, and she had a younger brother, and we were in the same class, so he was my uncle.
No.
Yep. And we were in the same class in high school. Yep. Everybody knew everybody.
Wow. But that sounds like as if, I think in Europe you would say that you would either live in the mountains because there's nobody else around and to marry your own family, or you come from a very small town.
But it's not that small. I mean, it is small, but it's not that small. There's probably 100,000 people who live in the whole county. There was plenty of other people to get to know. They just met people at family reunions or something. I don't know. They all hung out at the same place. I don't know, but it was interesting.
Yeah. Because 100,000 here in Europe, it can be a city. It would not be a town, right? But with us, when I grew up and I went to a certain school, there was one town that was just one single street. There were 20 houses, and that was a small town. For us, that is like a small town, not 100,000 people.
Right.
Amazing that they found each other.
And when I say that, and I mean the surrounding area, of the whole.
Okay.
The whole, like the city and all the little cities that surround it, and the county and everything, like everybody. But there was still plenty of other people for them to get to know.
Yes, yeah.
But they didn't.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but as long as we're happy.
Everybody got along fine.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That's really funny.
Yep.
I do have, I think I've got one cousin who married somebody else who is more or less also related, somewhere like, far back. And I think maybe they only found out when they got married. And yeah, but for the rest, I'm sure that my dad and my mom, they were not related. They were not related.
Now, my mom and dad weren't related. It was all the step people.
Yeah.
All the people they married were.
Wow.
It's like they kept marrying into the same families.
So what happened then when they got divorced? Did they still hang out because they're still family? So would you then still see them at family gatherings or not?
Well, the children we did. I saw the children, all the time, everywhere.
Yeah.
The parents, and it's interesting. Everybody just kind of got along.
Nice.
In those groups, it wasn't a snarky thing, or I didn't notice it being a snarky thing as a kid. It was more like my mother divorced my father when I was 5, so that was 45 years ago. And that name, my dad's name is Brown, and they're having a Brown family reunion in a couple weeks. If she was still alive, she could still go to the Brown family reunion. Like my parents, my grandparents, my dad's family always considered my mom part of her family.
Oh, nice.
Always, even when she died, like they were the ones who came down to help plan the funeral and do all of that stuff. She was always part of the family.
Yeah.
And so all that was really nice, that with my parents, there was never an exclusionary thing. Like my dad could come over if he chose to. He didn't, but he could come over and visit. He was always invited to birthday parties. It was never a thing. It wasn't like when I got divorced. When I got divorced from the father of my children, it was a nasty, ugly thing, unfortunately.
For you or for your children?
For me, because I tried to keep it as as nice for the kids as possible, but it was ugly. And the kids, they saw the ugly stuff, because of course the dad would say things, and it was like, well, is that what you have observed? You know, that kind of stuff. So I tried really hard not to influence their opinions, but I would ask them to make their own judgments based on, you know, what they saw or what they understood. But it was not pleasant, and it wasn't nice, and it took years for us to be able to be in the same place without really triggering each other. But it wasn't like that for my parents. It was just okay.
Yeah.
And I never talked to them about why that was.
But how was it then for you to grow up with divorced parents? Were you like going from one house to the other as well? Were you like spending a weekend here and there?
Well, I had the opportunity to, and I really wanted to spend time with my dad, but he didn't really make the effort. No. So most of the time I spent that time with my grandparents. So when my dad would have had custody, I was with my grandparents. Or if my mom needed a babysitter, I was with my grandparents. And so that is what really, I guess, made it so companionable, was that she was still part of the family because she was taking me over to them, her in-laws' house, right? And so it just all was, it was okay.
You know, when you were saying it's when, even though when your parents got divorced and stuff, you were like, you know, your mom was still being accepted and it was still okay, you know, you could hang around. I'm just looking for a piece of paper because I want to demonstrate something. So when one of my uncles got divorced, and I saw this happening because I just sat at the same table, what happened with my grandparents was that my grandma would go through the photo album. She would take pictures out of the photo album, and she just did this. So we don't need it anymore.
Wow.
So the people that they were divorced from, they were just ripped out of the album, non-existing.
Wow.
So this is also, that's why I'm curious to hear, like, how was it for you living with parents who were divorced, and how did it go further? Because the experience that I have had was, you were just being ripped out of their lives.
Right. Well, and I can tell you from my experience as an adult, when me and the father of my children got divorced, I was ripped out of his entire family's life. Like, they stopped speaking to me completely. And me and his mother were really close. They lived with us. I mean, it was all kinds of nothing. I mean, crickets, nothing. And I saw them at my daughter's wedding, and I saw them at my son's wedding. And, you know, we were nice to each other, cordial, but, you know, they couldn't have cared two flicks about me.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow. So I never really understood that, because I was raised with that still being part of the family thing. But like you said, they just ripped me out. It's like I didn't exist.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was like, wow. So that was really hurtful for me.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
I can imagine. Because for me, it was like looking at my grandparents doing, or at least it was my grandma doing that, even though, you know, I knew my aunt, and they were just, you know, ripping her out of her picture as if she didn't exist. I was like, well, that's quite harsh. You know, because she has been part of the family for a couple of years, and if they do not get along anymore on a certain level, it's fine, but it doesn't mean that you have to cut them out of your lives too.
Right. Right. But that's what some people do.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me see. Oh yeah. You mentioned in one of the videos you were a heavy smoker. How was that experience? Because I never smoked.
I started smoking when I was 11 because everybody in my family smoked.
Wow.
And I would actually walk down to the local store and buy cigarettes for everybody. Back then, kids could buy them.
No, really?
And so one day I just added a pack for me. I think I'll try some of those. And so I just started smoking, and I smoked off and on for about 25 years. When I knew I wanted to have children, I stopped smoking. Mm-hmm. And I stopped all the way through nursing, having both my kids when I finished breastfeeding. And then I started smoking again. And I quit in 2007. That's the last time I smoked.
Do you miss it?
I do. Yeah. If it was healthy for me, I would do it again in a heartbeat, but it's not. Mm. And I've had a cigarette since then, like, out in a social situation just to try it. And I felt so terrible afterwards. It was like, okay, I don't want to do this, which is good. But I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. It was my drug of choice. Mm. And I was glad that I had started smoking before I got into my teenage years, because I was around a lot of drugs and alcohol and other things. And since I was already addicted to the cigarettes, that need was met. So I didn't get addicted to any of the other drugs like some of my other friends did.
Yeah.
I just took the smoking with me. And like I said, I quit that in 2007, and it was agony. It was agony. And
in what way?
Physically painful, mentally painful, emotionally painful. It was traumatic. And it took 2-3 years for me not to think about a cigarette every time I got on the telephone or every time I went outside, because I always smoked outside. I never smoked in my house. And so the phone would ring, I'd pick up my phone, I'd go out in the yard, and I'd smoke a cigarette while I was talking on the phone. Well, anytime I answered the phone after that for years, it would be automatic, I'm going to go outside and smoke a cigarette. And so it was retraining my patterns of behavior, my patterns of thought, my emotional behavior. If I got really angry, I would want a cigarette. If I got stressed, I'd want a cigarette. I'd wake up in the morning, I'd want a cigarette, right? All of these things had to change. Mm-hmm. And it took years for it not to be something I had to do on purpose every day, all day.
Wow, so it's like a habit.
It was a big habit. Yeah. It was an ingrained, rutted habit. It was deep. Yeah.
So why did you just start at 11? I mean, was there a certain reason for you to start? Is only because your family did it? So just that's common?
Yeah, it was just, I think I'm going to do that. I want to try this too. And I bought a pack and I liked it. And like most people say, when they're kids and they smoke a cigarette, it makes them sick. It didn't make me sick because I lived with it. Mm-hmm. So, I guess I was already used to it because they smoked in the house. And it was just a thing. I had a smoking permit in school, which means that at break time at school, we could go outside and smoke cigarettes.
When you were 11?
No, when I was 13 was when I got.
But still.
Yeah, and we could smoke in high school. Had a smoking permit. A permit, literally, it said that our parents signed that said we were allowed to smoke, and so we could go outside and smoke. There were a bunch of us. It was a thing, I'm telling you.
Wow. So did anything change in the meantime? I mean, how is it for your kids when they are going to school? Do those permits still exist? Or
no, because they've raised the smoke. They actually put in a smoking age because there wasn't one before. And I think it's 18. It was 18, but I think they're trying to raise it to 20 or 21 now. So my kids were not exposed to that being a possibility. And in fact, I always told them while I was smoking, this is a filthy habit, don't you do it. And you see how addicted I am to this, and you see how, you know, how much a struggle this is. And so neither one of them have wanted to smoke.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, because I've never smoked. The reason why is because my dad smoked, and he smoked in the house. So I remember when I was, when I was small, especially during weekends, because he would be inside the house, there would be a cloud hanging underneath the ceiling. It was a cloud of smoke, and I had issues breathing. I was getting very dry eyes. I was complaining to my dad that he had to stop, because I think he smoked in that time maybe 2 packs a day.
Wow.
2 packs a day, and he started the day with the cigarette, and he would not go outside. He would stay inside because it's cozy and it's warm. So why would you go outside? And then I think a couple of my uncles and aunts, they were smoking too, and I just and I can remember, because I think it was my second trip to Asia. My first trip was when I was 2, so I don't really remember that. But my second trip was when I was 5. And in that time, it was still legal and possible to smoke on an airplane.
Yep. I've smoked on an airplane.
Really?
Yep. Yep.
It is so fresh in my memory.
Yeah.
And it is like, I'm so happy that they changed the entire thing, because was a smoker's part in the back of the airplane? Because there was like, separate section for people who were smoking. So it was my mom and my sister sitting somewhere else, and I was always with my dad. And then there was like, I could remember 3 seats. So there was a guy at the window. It was me as a 5-year-old, and then my dad. And they were smoking continuously. And going from Europe to Asia, it can take like 15 hours, 15 hours flight. I got so nauseous, and I said to my dad, I cannot, I'm getting sick. So luckily that guy, he was younger. I think he was like mid-30s or so. So he was okay to sit at the aisle, and I was at the window. So at least I had some fresh air somewhere. And then I remember we got off the plane, and then my father said like, okay, we have a break. Sometimes the planes would, stop somewhere and they get some new fuel, or you had to transfer the planes. But I think this time it was actually getting off board, so get more fuel. And then we had to break for maybe an hour or so. So we got off the plane, and then my father said like, okay, let's go somewhere where we can get some fresh air. And it's like, oh, finally. You know what a fresh air meant for him? The smoker's lounge. So I was as a child being in a smoker's lounge, and I was like, how can this be, fresh air?
Yeah, that's crazy.
And yeah. So that's for me the reason why I did not want to smoke, because I live with that. So for you, it's very normal because everybody did it, so you want to try. And for me, it was like, no. No, I don't want to. I did not even do drugs either. I did not even smoke a joint. Although a lot of people, huh? You did?
I did.
Yeah.
I did enough for both of us.
Oh, okay, good. I hope you enjoyed it.
Did all I needed to do. I was over that by the time I was 16.
And how long did you do that for? Was it like occasionally, or was it?
Yeah, just occasionally.
Yeah. Because I remember the time when I went to high school, they were starting to smoke cigarettes. So I think they were maybe 15, 16, and that was like some kind of a phase in your life. You want to show who you are, and then cool clothes and whatsoever. And so there were a couple of guys and girls who were smoking, but they were also smoking joints. And I did not do it because one of my cousins was smoking weed, and he actually committed suicide after a couple of years. So that was for me the reason not to do it. And I'm not sure actually if I already told in another video, but I'm still going to say it. When I was around 16 or so, 16, 17, there was one of my one of my classmates, and in a way he was, I don't want to say cautious or anything, but he said to me, Cindy, when I ever find you either smoking, taking ecstasy, LSD, he said, I will punch you so hard that you will end up in the hospital. Because he was doing all that stuff, and he said to me, in that kind of way, he told me indirectly, I do not want you to do that, because I know what kind of influence it has on my life right now, and I don't want you to go there.
Right.
So that was for me like, got your hint. I will not do it. So I've never done it. So I would not know how it is, to be addicted to cigarettes or to drugs. I don't know.
That's
I saw what the influence it was for my environment.
Mm-hmm. That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not when you're 5 and getting fresh air in the smoker's lounge.
No, it was not good. No.
Okay, let's see. Do we have anything else? Marriage. So you mentioned, at least I think was this is on your website as well, that you married when you were 16.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first time, right?
Yep. First time I got married, I was 16 years old. And I call it my emancipation, because I was only together with him for 4 months because he was an alcoholic and he tried to beat me up.
Oh.
And so I left him after we were married for 4 months. But in the state of Georgia, you have to be separated, or had to be separated, for 6 months before you could get a divorce. So legally, we were married for 10 months. But when I got my divorce, I was still 16. I was still in high school. I was classified as an adult, and I lived on my own. And when I went to school, if there was anything that a parent had to sign, a permission slip, an absentee form, something like that, I would just go into the office and write the thing and sign it and hand it to them, because I was an adult.
Oh, so you were adult because you were married?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yep. I didn't have any parental supervision after that. It was just me.
Wow. So what made you marry this guy when you were 16?
It was time for me to be emancipated. My mom was moving to Florida, and she had some disabilities, and she needed to move to Florida for her health. And the disability wouldn't pay for me to go, and I didn't want to go. And so a way to get out of that was for me to get married.
Mm.
And in Georgia, you're allowed to get married at 16 without permission, even though she did sign for me. She didn't have to, because at 16, you're old enough to decide if you want to get married in Georgia. You are not old enough to decide, let me tell you. But so legally, you can.
Is it still the case today?
I think so, yeah.
Wow.
16-year-olds are not old enough to get married.
So how old was he? Was he around the same age?
Oh, no, he was 23.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So how was it for you, like, because when people are going into a relationship or marriage, it feels like your life is completely different. You are like, you're having this role as a wife. You need to take care of the household and stuff. Did you have that as well when you were 16?
Well, I had always been taking care of the household because my mom was sick. And so I was always the one that was responsible for taking care of the stepbrothers and sisters, for making sure all the chores got done, for doing the cooking and the cleaning and making sure all of that stuff happened. So it wasn't really anything different. It was just normal, except I was doing it in my house instead of somebody else's house. And I worked. I went to school and I worked. I had a job. So I paid my own rent. and utilities. And after I got divorced, I moved back into a rental house that my grandparents owned. And so that helped a lot because they didn't charge me rent. Because it was the house was already paid for, and so they're like, we're not going to charge you rent, you just have to take care of it and pay all the utilities and stuff. And so that was really helpful.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. So how long lasted it for you to be divorced and remarry?
I got remarried the day after I graduated from high school, so I was 18. And he joined the Air Force, and we moved to California, and we had our 2 children there. And then we went to Germany and then Florida, and then we got divorced. We were married for 11 years. Yep.
Okay. Wow.
And then I got divorced, and a couple years later, a year and a half later or so, I got married for the 3rd time. And we moved to Georgia, and we were married for 8 years. And then I got divorced.
So with your current husband, does he have the same background as you?
Well, we're not married, but we're just, we're beloveds. He is an engineer, which means he thinks a lot. He's very creative. He's very interesting. He uses big words. And I am a psychic and an intuitive, and I go with what I feel and what I hear and things that aren't necessarily explainable through science. And he's okay with that, and I'm okay with him.
Oh, perfect.
So it's really interesting. Because we're very different.
Yeah.
We're opposites in so many ways.
And still it works out. Yay.
Yay.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah.
So for you, you've not been married, right?
No.
But you've had some unpleasant relationships?
Yeah. Yes. And the biggest influence I've had was actually, I think it started also around my teenage years, just before I was 16. There was a guy who really liked me, and I started to see him actually more out as a stalker. It is something that is hard to explain because it is more happening on a mental level. It is like, I can remember he actually followed me to the same school when I was going, I don't know how to call it. It is like maybe college. So he followed me there, and it was a small school. And I remember, so when the break happened, and you come back from your lunch break or so, you will be standing in front of the door of your next class. And sometimes you will be standing in the same hallway. And I could hear him saying to a girl who actually liked him. This girl really liked him, and he told her, saying like, "Can you move because I cannot look at her?" So I heard those things. Or it was, I was walking somewhere and I had to go somewhere, and I saw one of his friends, and then his friends was like, "Hey," and I'm calling his name, saying like, "She's going there and there." And it is like hearing these kind of things, that you are being observed and being watched. Or I would be in a bus and I saw one of his friends. We actually know each other already from elementary school. So this guy was in the bus. He was going back home. He would text this dude, and hey, Sydney is in the same bus. And he would stand there at the bus station where I had to go out. But he didn't live there. you know. So these are all, for me, it is like happening more like on a mental level. You cannot really explain it to people. Some people would say like, okay, well, just ignore it, just pretend that he's not there. But for me, it had a very deep impact, because I could hear what he said. Or when he just passed for his driving license. So driving license is what you get when you are 18. And I was one time, I wanted to cross the street. There was no crossover, but I wanted to cross the street, and then he would accelerate the car, you know? So these kind of things has like, for me, a big impact. So that was number one. And then there was a number two, a guy who really liked me, and he said like, oh, do you want to date me? And I was like, well, no. My father also has been very strict. He said to me, he gave me like somehow like a deadline. Do not date any boys until you're 18. And my father is a very strict person, so I better watch, you know, what he was saying. So there was a guy who really liked me, and I said, no, I don't want to date you. I like you as a person, but I don't want to do anything further than that. And he could not really cope with my answer. So one day he was, I think he dropped somehow like a letter in the mailbox with hearts on it and stuff. So my mom found the letter, she opened the door, and she gave the letter back to this guy. So he said like, no, this is for Cindy, you have to give it to her. And my mom's like, nope, I'm not going to give it to her. Take the letter back, you know. And then I think he got so upset by that he was cycling, you know, on his bicycle in front of our house almost every single day, and you watch inside. If he would see me in front, you know, behind in front of the window, he would turn back and he would ring the doorbell. So he would always be looking inside, and he noticed that I would not open the door. So he had this idea to sit in front of our home for a full week. The entire week. He would not go to school. He was there until like early morning until early evening, and they would be there the entire day. And I was so scared, because this guy was not literally, but it felt to me that he was like twice the height, you know, and she was bigger. It was like, you know, so I was very happy actually that he did not realize he also had a back entrance, so I could get to school every single day. But when I left the house, I was shaking. When I go back home, I was shaking, because I knew he would be there, and I just crossing my fingers that he would not see me somewhere. So that was for me the most unpleasant experiences when it comes to the opposite sex.
Wow, that's really scary.
It was for me, but it is, I think in that time period, it was maybe the beginning of being stalked. And I was, there was a day that I actually wanted to call the police, but I was like, how did I explain that somebody is passing by your window all the time? You know what I mean? Because he's not attacking me, or he's not throwing stuff or whatever. He's just passing by, but it's something on a mental note.
Right.
Yeah. And then, sorry, what do you want to say?
But it's a thing now, like they would understand what that means now, because stalking has become, has been revealed. Right?
Yeah. It is, for me, I did not report it, because I was like, I don't have any evidence. People will maybe say like, well, he's just passing by, he doesn't do anything, so, you know, he's young, he might do stupid stuff. You know, you cannot prove that he accelerated the car. It's only because I heard it, you know. Mm-hmm. So it was for me like, I don't have any evidence. In case they were asking for it, I don't have it.
Right. And so when did they stop?
Or
what caused them to stop?
With the first one who was watching me at school, I knew that I could, on an energetic level, I could pretend things. So in that time, I was already like experimenting. So I was having a discussion with the head of the school, and I went into his office just to discuss my place where to have my traineeship. That was the entire conversation. But I got out of the door because one of his friends was standing in front of the door, and I was pretending to look in a way as if I was going to change schools. So he was like, "Oh, is everything okay?" And it's like, "No, I'm not sure. I think I will go to the city." It's like, "Oh, okay." And then I was talking to other people and I said, "I think I'm going to change schools. I'm going to another city because the school is bigger." So the following school year, I did not see him, and he was not there because he changed schools, but I didn't. So that was for me. That was actually the reason why I stopped seeing, because he decided to go to the city because he thought I would be there.
Wow.
But I wasn't. I pretended that I did. And with the other one who was sitting in front of my door, I cannot really remember. I think that it stopped after he sat in front of my house for a week. I cannot remember actually what happened afterwards. He might have found a job or something, and I might have because I was a little bit. What thing? No, it's not maybe older. I cannot remember. I think he found a job or something. So I would see him sometimes in town, because the village I lived in was like 8,000 people. I saw him occasionally, but he would never physically attack me. It was just his posture, because he is tall and he was like firm, like he was working with his hands, he was working outside. So that was more for me the fear that I just saw him. He would not approach me or he would not yell at me. Yeah, there was something that I did to stop it. It just stopped on one day.
Wow. Well, I'm glad it stopped.
Yeah, me too. But it did have an impact on me, because I thought like, well, can I still be nice to boys without them, sitting in front of my door for a week? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's got to be scary to think how. I mean, if boys are going to act like this without you, addressing them or being in relationship with them, how are they going to act if they are?
Yeah.
That had to be scary.
Yeah. So I was in a phase, afterwards I was in a phase, and you know what I did as well when I was being stalked at school? I was like, you know what? I am going to undress so unappealing as possible, wearing the most strangest things ever, in the hope that he would not notice me. Because I thought people are very fixed on the image, on how people look like. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to wear very ugly clothes. And I really was wearing I was wearing headbands with like tape, what to wear. It's like the thing that you can stick together, you know what I mean? I was in that time I only was wearing black, dark brown, dark blue, gray. Nothing in color, just so unappealing as possible. And it did not work.
Wow.
And then I was like, shoot. So on one hand side, it's a good sign, because then he was attracted to my personality rather than how I looked.
Mm-hmm.
There's a plus side, but I was like, I just wanted to be left alone.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, that didn't work. I tried to, and actually I was very close. I actually want to step into a mental institution and say, please take me in because I'm going bonkers.
Yeah.
And it can also, because, when they are having this kind of attitude, you go up in your mind, right? Like, what did I do to cause this? So you always look at yourself, like, what have I done that caused them to think like this? It might not have anything to do with me. You know what I mean? But you go into your mind and it goes only further and further, and you go down, go further down, and you were like, oh, please just take me in somewhere in the institute, and then we will see from there.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you had that experience.
Yeah, me too. I'm still actually figuring out why I had to go. I had to go through that, and then after those two boys, I decided to go for older men because I thought, like, well, they're more adult. They, so I was dating guys who were at least 10 years older than I was.
Mm-hmm.
But I can say they are not more adult, not in an adult way that I wanted.
Right.
Or be with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that were my experiences.
Wow. Well, hopefully you will attract the perfect right person for you.
Yay! Yes. I'm sure I will.
I am sure you will too. Well, we're about at our hour limit. So is there anything you want to add before we wrap up today?
No.
That was awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you too. It is fun to hear all the contradictions.
Yep, it is, and the big thing is we're both psychic and we both channel and we both have totally different upbringings and totally different experiences with our bodies and with people and with everything. And so it's really important, folks, for you to understand that your story and your past is yours, and it doesn't define who you become. And it doesn't limit you from what you can become. So do your shadow work, clear, heal, do all of those things, and come into who you are, because we need you to be doing your divine and sacred work so that we all can work together to change the world.
Yes.
Yay.
Yes.
So if you want to have a session with me, you can reach me at info@yourownsoul.com, or check out my website at yourownsoul.com. Or if you want to have a session with Cindy, who does amazing sound healings, you can contact her at info@channelingcarla.com, or visit her website at channelingcarla.com. And is there anything else you want to say?
Actually, not, but you already said everything. It is super important to look into ourselves and what we actually can learn from our life experiences. It is not that we are here to be like a victim, look at me, what happened? But what is it that you can learn from it? What is the power that you can get out of those experiences? And then get back on track and say, like, this is who I am. I've learned something and now I'm ready to move on, because it is why we're both here for.
Yep, exactly. What is the medicine? Yep. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and we will see you next time.
See you.
Bye.